Knut Hamsun was a Norwegian writer and spent much of his childhood in the north, which is also the scene of many of his grimly realistic novels and stories. I suspect if you know him at all, you would know him through his work called The Growth of the Soil, which is an epic and for which he received the Nobel Prize in Literature as well in 1920. He was pretty much against this idea of industrialization in democratic societies, and because of that he spent a lot of time in the prison as well. But he has left behind a large piece of work, and that gives you really interesting perspective on life, and I think much of that comes from the kind of experiences he's had in life. For example, he was a clerk, a peddler, a shoemaker, a dockhand, a sheriff, a teacher, a wanderer in fact, and of course a writer too. And that's something you would notice with all the amazing writers, that they add so much value to the literature, as if the art has come alive. That's the life in their works that you find. And today, the story that I'm going to narrate to you, it's written by Knut Hamsun. It's called The Call of Life. And since he didn't write in English, he wrote in Norwegian, I'm going to read the translated version. It's a very simple story, but you find how beautifully he articulates various things and builds the narrative to narrate a very simple tale. So let me start the story called The Call of Life. Down near the inner harbor in Copenhagen, there is a street called Westervold, a relatively new yet desolate boulevard. There are few houses to be seen on it, few gas lamps, and almost no people whatsoever. Even now, in summer, it is rare that one sees people promenading there. Well, last evening, I had something of a surprise in that street. I had taken a few turns up and down the sidewalk when a lady came towards me from the opposite direction. There were no other people in sight. The gas lamps were lighted, but it was nevertheless dark. So dark that I could not distinguish the lady's face. One of the usual creatures of the night, I thought to myself, and passed her by. At the end of the boulevard, I turned about and walked back. The lady had also turned about, and I met her again. She's waiting for someone, I thought, and I was curious to see whom she could be waiting for. And again I passed her by. When I met her the third time, I tipped my hat and spoke to her. Good evening, are you waiting for someone? She was startled. No, that is, yes, she was waiting for someone. Did she object to my keeping her company till the person she was expecting arrived? No, she did not object in the least, and she thanked me. For that matter, she explained, she was not expecting anyone. She was merely taking the air. It was so still here. We strolled about side by side. We began talking about various things of no great consequence. I offered my arm. Thank you, but no, she said, and shook her head. There was no great fun promenading in this way. I could not see her in the dark. I struck a match to see what time it was. I held the match up and looked at her too. 9:30, I said. She shivered as if she were freezing. I seized the opportunity. You're freezing, I asked. Shouldn't we drop in some place and get something to drink? At Tivoli, At the National? But, don't you see, I cannot go anywhere now, she answered. And I noticed then, for the first time, that she wore a very long black veil. I begged her pardon and blamed the darkness for my mistake. And the way in which she took my apology at once convinced me that she was not one of the usual night wanderers. "Won't you take my arm?" I suggested again. "It may warm you a bit." She took my arm. We paced up and down a few turns. She asked me to look at the time again. "It is 10, I said. "Where do you live?" On Camel Conjevi." I stopped her. "And may I see you to your door?" I asked. "Not very well," she answered. "No, I cannot let you. You live on Breadgate, don't you?" "How do you know that?" I asked in surprise. "Oh, I know you, who you are," she answered. There was a pause. We walked arm in arm down the lighted streets. She walked rapidly, her long veil streaming behind. "We had better hurry," she said. At her door in Camel Conjevi, she turned toward me as if to thank me for kindness in escorting her. I opened the door for her and she entered slowly. I thrust my shoulder gently against the door and followed her in. Once inside, she seized my hand. Neither of us said anything. We mounted 2 flights of stairs and stopped on the 3rd floor. She herself unlocked the door to her apartment, then opened a second door and took me by the hand and led me in. It was presumably a drawing room. I could hear a clock ticking on the wall. Once inside the door, the lady paused a moment, threw her arms about me suddenly, and kissed me passionately on the mouth. Right on the mouth. "Won't you be seated?" she suggested. "Here is the sofa. Meanwhile, I'll get a light." And she lit a lamp. I looked about me, amazed, yet curious. I found myself in a spacious and extremely well-furnished drawing room with other half-open doors leading into several rooms on the side. I could not for the life of me make out what sort of person it was I had come across. "What a beautiful room!" I exclaimed. "Do you live here?" "Yes, this is my home," she answered. "Is this your home? You live with your parents then?" "Oh, no, no," she laughed. "I'm an old woman, as you'll see." And she removed her veil and her wraps. "There, see, what did I tell you?" she said, and threw her arms about me once again, abruptly driven by some uncontrollable urge. She might have been 22 or 23, wore a ring on her right hand, and might for that matter really have been a married woman. Beautiful? No, she was freckled and had scarcely any eyebrows. But there was an effervescent life about her, and her mouth was strangely beautiful. I wanted to ask her who she was, where her husband was, if she had any, and whose house this was I was in. But she threw herself about me every time I opened my mouth and forbade me to be inquisitive. "My name is Elaine," she explained. "Would you care for something to drink? It really won't disturb anyone if I ring. Perhaps you would step in here in the bedroom meanwhile." I went into the bedroom. The light from the drawing room illuminated it partially. I saw 2 beds. Elaine rang and ordered wine, and I heard a maid bring in the wine and go out again. A little later, Elaine came into the bedroom after me, but she stopped short in the door. I took a step towards her. She uttered a little cry and at the same time came towards me. This was last evening. What further happened? Ah, patience, there's much more. It was beginning to grow light this morning when I awoke. The daylight crept into the room on either side of the curtain. Elaine was also awake and smiled towards me. Her arms were white and velvety, her breast unusually high. I whispered something to her, and she closed my mouth with hers, mute with tenderness. The day grew lighter and lighter. 2 hours later, I was on my feet. Elaine was also up, busy dressing herself. She had got her shoes on. Then it was I experienced something which even now strikes me as a gruesome dream. I was at the wash stand. Elaine had some errand or other in the adjoining room, and as she opened the door, I turned around and glanced in. A cold draught from the open window in the room rushed in upon me, and in the center of the room I could just make out a corpse stretched out on a table. A corpse in a coffin, dressed in white with a grey beard, the corpse of a man. His bony knees protruded like madly clenched fists underneath the sheet, and his face was sallow and ghastly in the extreme. I could see everything in full daylight. I turned away and said not a word. When Elaine returned, I was dressed and ready to go out. I could scarcely bring myself to respond to her embraces. She put on some additional clothes. She wanted to accompany me down as far as the street door, and I let her come, still say nothing. At the door, she pressed close to the wall so as not to be seen. "Well, goodbye," she whispered. "Till tomorrow?" I asked, in part to test her. No, not tomorrow." "Why not tomorrow?" "Not so many questions, dear. I'm going to a funeral tomorrow. A relation of mine is dead. Now, dear, you know it. But the day after tomorrow?" "Yes, the day after tomorrow, at the door here. I will meet you. Goodbye." And I went. Who was she? And the corpse? With its fists clenched and the corners of its mouth drooping. How ghastly comic. The day after tomorrow she would be expecting. Should I see her again? I went down to the Bernina Cafe and asked for a directory. I looked up the numbers so and Gamel Conjivi, and there was the name. I waited some little time till the morning papers were out. Then I turned quickly to the announcements of deaths, and sure enough, there I found hers too, the very first in the list, in bold type. My husband, 53 years old, died today after a long illness. The announcement was dated the day before. I sat for a long time and pondered. A man marries. His wife is 30 years younger than he. He contracts a lingering illness. One fair day, he dies. And the young widow breathes a sigh of relief.